I believe that focusing on our mental health on an individual and collective level is really the answer to the end of war. I think it's the answer to the end of poverty. I think it's the answer to the end of decimating our environment. I think it's the answer to most of the problems that human beings face. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why is very simple, because the bottom line of mental health and psychology is that we would no longer do to anyone else what we wouldn't want them to do to ourselves.
Hey, hello there, and welcome to the Creation Podcast. I am your host, Manarak of Gray. And on this podcast, we talk to change makers and just change practitioners and people issuing new mindset around community, politics, economy, and ecology, in the hopes that we can give those other change makers out there or people wanting to get into the space tools that they can use. So I want to welcome my guest. Today I have Phyllis Leavitt. Did I say that right? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't ask before. So today I have Phyllis Leavitt with me. Um, so I'll give you a moment to introduce yourself and tell the audience what it is that you do in your line of work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me as a guest on your show today. I love the topic of your program because that's really what my work is all about. I've been a psychotherapist for well over 30 years, and I've treated individuals and couples, families, children, adolescents, and have really had a lot of experience in family systems. And somewhere along the line, it occurred to me pretty strongly that all groups of people operate on family systems that are either healthy or dysfunctional or abusive, all the way to violent and very, very harmful.
Yeah.
And so I got the idea that it was really important to look at our country and to larger groups of people like corporations or communities, and even the whole world of humanity through the lens of family systems, because I think that a focus on our mental health is the biggest missing piece in our national agenda, in politics, in our social functioning, in the way we look at education, ecology, all the things that you mentioned, medicine, all the ways that we function together. Are we actually practicing good mental health? Are we helping people thrive? Or are we hurting people at someone's expense?
Yeah.
And these are all the things that good mental health addresses. So that's why I wrote the book that you see in the background, America in Therapy, which is really bringing the world of psychology to national attention.
Yeah. And I
With
do.
all of what we have up till, I'm sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, no.
Yeah.
No, finish your sentence, please.
Well, I just wanted to say that the purpose is that there are things that we know in the field of psychology, not that we know everything yet, because every discipline is a growing discipline.
Mm.
But we know so much about how to heal dysfunctional family dynamics, how to help people heal from the after effects of violence or abuse or sexual violence or discrimination, or lack of resources, or ways that they're marginalized in society or in their homes. We know how to help people heal and become more contributing, functional, safe people in their homes, in their communities, and in the world around them. And I would love to see those principles be applied and really become conscious on a national level.
Yeah, so I was gonna agree with you there because so what I've studied international development management, and there's a lot of the focus on like the external effects of things and external effects of policy and these things. And at some point, also as an artist, I'm exploring my personal growth, my internal growth, and I realized that there's this disconnect between, we compartmentalized compartmentalized. It's too much. It's like if it's outer world, it's only you focus on outer, and you cannot, or we don't pay attention to what our inner world is, how that's affecting the decisions that are being made, not only on a personal level in your life, but also that would, since we are humans, that has effect. Also, if on your job that you're taking, and if you have this job where you're making these important decisions and you're on the inside, you're not, I say, balanced to make these decisions, then those, you will see that effect in the decisions being made. And when I put those two together, I don't have a background in psychology, but I think I have um, quite a natural understanding of it. And I also came to a similar realization in terms of this. So yeah, if you want to tell us a little bit more about that journey for you, at what point, as a therapist, did you look at the world and realize that this had effect on each other?
Yeah, I mean, it started obviously, or not obviously, but for many people like myself, it started with my own healing journey. I had childhood trauma that I didn't remember for a long time and began to recall when I was in my late 30s and early 40s. And I went to therapy for the first time when I was in my 30s, and I began to realize, like a light bulb went off, like, oh, the things that happened to me in my childhood really affected the way I am in relationship, the way I am as a parent, my goals in the world, my feelings of inadequacy, my feelings of unlovability, or, my fear of having my voice. And for each person, their conditioning affects them in a different way.
Yeah.
And to the extent that their conditioning is healthy and they felt loved and safe and that they belonged and that they were valued, people who grow up that way tend to become safe, loving, cooperative, somewhat open-minded people in their adult lives,
Yeah.
and can tolerate their own distress well because they've learned to be taken well care of, and so they take good care of other people. And people who have been abused, who have been neglected, who have been in their homes, in their communities, by their society, tend to become symptomatic through no fault of their own. It's
Mm.
like if you eat poison, you're going to get sick. If
Yeah.
we eat bad psychological food from other human beings, we're going to become symptomatic. And so I began to see through my own experience of healing that it was possible to heal the wounds that we've received from other people and to reclaim our most essential self and our gifts and our resources and our love. I didn't like myself when I grew up, and that was a result of having significant trauma in my childhood where I internalized some very negative messages about who I was. And that's true for many, many people in the United States and around the world.
Yeah.
And and what I saw from my own healing journey was that it's possible to heal. And I'd love to say this to your audience, that I've never worked with anyone, and I've worked with hundreds of people over the years. I've never worked with anyone who had an opportunity to really heal some of the hurt that they received growing up or even in their adult life, who's had an opportunity to heal, who doesn't become more loving, more open minded, more compassionate, more tolerant of their own distress and other people's distress, and who isn't more committed to healthy relationship. Because when we reclaim our essential self, that's who we are.
Yeah.
We're loved human beings by nature.
Yeah, I agree with you that a lot of the behaviors are learned,
Right.
and passed down, whether to trauma or like just the behavior of your family. And when we look at um, communal communal healing, which is what your book suggests, America in Therapy.
Right.
Um, that seems like a challenge to me. So my question is also like, how do you get there, where, let's say, you're not going to be able to reach everyone probably, but how do we get to the majority of people to, yeah, issue in this communal healing?
Well, I think there's so many ways that it's important to reach people, and I try to touch on many, many of the principles and the practices in my book because it's a conglomeration of understanding and then applying new tools. But one of the fundamental ones is deep listening without reacting, like really listening with an open mind to what somebody else has to say. And that's one of the things that the best therapy has to offer. You have a therapist in the room with you who's listening to your story, listening to your pain, listening to the places where you got blocked, but also listening for your strengths and your gifts and your value and what you have to offer yourself and those around you. And so that kind of deep listening, compassionate listening, wise listening is one of the bottom lines of healing. And if we look around us in the world today at some of the highest levels of discourse that's going on in the world, there's not that kind of listening going on. There's blame, there's judgment, there's
Mhm.
violent reactions, there's discrimination, and there's all kinds of, targeting and naming people, whole groups of people, without ever giving them a voice in the world to their reality.
Yeah.
So it's one of the fundamental principles of the best therapy that we could begin to apply. I mean, I always say, imagine if in Congress, in our country, we had facilitators that were actually facilitating people to listen to one another's different point of view, with an open mind. You don't have to agree,
Hmm. Hmm.
but you also don't have to attack.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we are learning in our homes, right? People don't agree. That's just human nature. We have different biases, we have different conditioning, we have different values, we have different experiences that frame the way we look at the world and what our belief systems are.
Yeah.
But we have things to learn from each other. And when a system becomes closed and closed-minded and is not open to any other opinion, then we can't learn from one another and we're locked in a box. And, I think it's also part of human nature that when we get locked in a box like that, some among us are going to rebel. Some
Hmm.
among us are going to become highly symptomatic and turn inward on themselves. Um, and these are all the things that happen in dysfunctional families, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways, our country and many countries and many communities around the world are behaving like abusive and dysfunctional families and having the same very deleterious results on people. And if
Yeah.
I want to say one quick thing, because there's a lot of talk in the world today about intergenerational trauma.
Hmm.
I think that's so important that we're having these conversations and educating people about how trauma gets passed down from one generation to another if it's not interrupted, if it's not stopped, and if it's not healed.
Yeah.
And I think what the average person may not really understand is that it's not just that the individual person who's traumatized suffers and sometimes, becomes an addict or a rager or,
Hmm.
withdraws or, takes their aggression out on the people around them. But that we really understand that often they take their aggression out on people around them.
Yeah.
They take their pain and their anger and their hopelessness and their helplessness out on others. So if we really want to stop the cycle of violence and abuse and discrimination and withholding of resources and targeting marginalized people at home and around the world, we have to know that psychologically we have to take care of each other, or we're going to create more and more people who are symptomatic in very harmful ways that are socially deleterious and could backfire on any one of us.
Mm. Yeah, I had many thoughts as you were talking.
Okay, jump in. Yeah.
So, um, the first thought was how similar our current conversation is to one I had just a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about I think it was the second human evolution, he called it. And it came down to this, that we have to move away from like this warlike and tribal state to more compassion and listening to each other, allowing people to have the space to be themselves, as long as it's not harming anyone. And an example was given of a Muslim person they have their daily prayers, and allowing that person to have their that moment, or allowing someone to have whatever item of comfort they need in the moment. So that's what came to mind when you were talking about listening to each other. Not I might not agree that someone prays daily,
Right.
but giving them that space. And the other thought was about facilitators. So that was my, let's say, one of my favorite topics in school, is that they really taught how to facilitate these multi-stakeholder processes. We call them, where you have a certain issue, and around that issue, it can be a plot of land, or it can be our economy, or whatever. You always have different stakeholders, and each stakeholder wants something else done. I'll stick to the plot of land to make it easy. Everyone wants something else done on that communal plot of land, and that can bring about a lot of just discussion and anger, because someone might not want to develop it at all, because it's their plot of land that they walk their dog on, for example. Someone, like in the case of, we had a real life case where we facilitated a community near our school, and the children wanted like Six Flags. They wanted roller coasters, and other people wanted a park. And we learn how to facilitate this process, that in the end you have something that everyone benefits from. But for everyone to benefit from it, everyone has to give away, or let go a part of their ideal, in that sense, because you're not going to get exactly how you want it, because there's more people that should have some benefit out of it. And I would love to see a situation where you have these types of facilitators, as you said, in Congress, or yeah, just in the room with these politicians that are kind of, I guess, because I'm Dutch, so I'm on a Dutch Caribbean island. So my example of it would be like they call it the Tweede Kamer, which I guess similar to the Congress in America, and there is kind of like a president, but the president isn't really um, using the skill like the facilitator would try to take what that politician said and it kind of put it in other words, try to understand what is it that you mean, and really like dissecting the thing. It's just kind of keeping the order of, okay, you get to talk now and you get to talk now. So I am very curious what that would look like. And do you have instances in the US where something like this has happened, where you have kind of like a mediator between the politicians?
Well, I don't know if there's been mediation between politicians. I know that
Mm-hmm.
it happens on a smaller scale. You know, we have a lot of divorce mediation in the
Mm-hmm.
United States to help people who are separating, who don't agree, who can't come to an agreement, who don't feel like they can live peaceably with one another, but to help them separate peacefully for their own sake and
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of their children. And I think that's a really big one, that everything that goes on in the adult world, whether it's in the
Mm-hmm.
home, whether it's two parents fighting and they need mediation to help them come to some kind of peaceful agreement that they can live by for their own well-being and the sake of their family, or whether you're talking about leaders, you know, on a national level, we really need the skills to settle our differences, either settle them differently, peacefully, and as you said, maybe compromise. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
everybody doesn't get exactly what they want, because that's kind of the way it is in a family. You know, you have to balance what each individual wants with what's good for the whole family. And to me, that's the principle of a country. How do you balance the needs of the individuals with the needs of the larger communities and the country as a whole? And really, at this point, it's really the world as a whole.
Yeah.
You really think about it. Um, how do we do that? And it's not easy to do. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of deep listening. It takes a willingness to compromise. It takes a willingness to be responsible for my own behavior. If
Yeah.
I'm angry and aggressive and I'm trying to force you into my point of view or to give me what I want, then I'm acting like an unhealthy parent or an unhealthy family member.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we know what it's that the work actually of coming to some kind of balance between the individual and the whole actually serves everyone. And it is the road to peace. It is the road to the end of war. And that's why, you know, one of the big pictures around the little picture of our own healing and our own personal development, the big picture is that I believe that focusing on our mental health on an individual and collective level is really the answer to the end of war. I think it's the answer to the end of poverty. I think it's the answer to the end of decimating our environment. I think it's the answer to most of the problems that human beings face. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why is very simple, because the bottom line of mental health and psychology is that we would no longer do to anyone else what we wouldn't want them to do to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you again, Phyllis, on that one. And at the same time, the skill of what has to be done is kind of daunting,
Right.
right?
They're very.
So what do you say for like people that are thinking, well, how do we even reach something like this on that scale, the magnitude to which this has to be done, or people that would say that that's never going to happen?
Well, I think that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people really feel that today. Like, what difference can I make? You know,
Mm-hmm.
this is so much bigger than me. I don't have that kind of control to change policy. But I think what's really important is that we don't minimize the contribution that each person can make. If I'm a more loving person, if I'm a more tolerant person, if I'm a more generous person, if I take more responsibility for my own behavior and I really reflect on, how am I being with you? Am I being aggressive and dominating? Am I being open minded? Am I being tolerant? Am I standing up for what I believe in a peaceful and cooperative way? Am I exercising power in a way that doesn't take power away from you? We have no idea the ripple effect of our own mental, you know, healing and well-being, how that is on other people. But
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, a really small example is, um, you know, I know for me, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but just standing in a checkout line in a store, if I'm really friendly or the person behind the counter is really friendly to me, it lights up my day.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel good. And I take that feel good out into the world with me and into the next interaction I have. And so just the smallest acts of kindness and cooperation really can have an amazing ripple effect. Because I think part of what needs to happen today is grassroots.
Mm.
It's change on a grassroots level so that the people that we empower are actually healthy people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And then the other big thing that I would say that psychology, I mean, there's so many things, and I talk about a million of them in my book, but one of the big things that we can all look at is if you're suffering, if you have unhealed dysfunction or trauma in your own childhood, or if you find yourself in a really unhealthy relationship, whether it's with a partner or friends or a work environment, if you find yourself in a really unhealthy, hurtful environment, get some help. Chances are you're repeating something that you learned early on and don't know
Mm.
how to change. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts of the best psychology is that it really helps us look in a loving, compassionate, but wise way into our past and our conditioning and heal the worst of it so that we can become our greatest selves in the world. And I try to imagine that, like what would the world be like if we actually looked at each other and saw the good in each other and championed each other's gifts and talents? And it doesn't have to be anything big.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be that you're going to become a doctor or,
Right.
that you're going to clean up all the water in the world. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It might just be that you're a more loving parent and you create a more loving household, or you're good with animals, or you create a beautiful garden or beautiful art. We all have a gift and some way to serve.
Yeah.
I don't know that we all know that or are taught that.
I don't think enough of us are taught
Yeah.
that, and I think that it's also some work that you do as an adult that you could come to this realization. But also there, I think not enough of us are coming to such realizations. And
Mm.
I had an example of what you were saying that someone passes on their positivities. Like
Yeah.
working on a project, and I was really kind of agitated about a situation. And then my colleague calls me, and I tell her, but the way she reacts to it was so like, that's nothing. That I was like, okay, I'll let it go. And that just changed my mood for the rest of the day.
Right.
So yeah, I can certainly imagine a world where if more and more of us are having these realizations and conversations with each other, that we are um, showing up different in the world. And I always say, because I also don't want to go like on the what they call toxic positivity side of things.
Hmm.
We're human. You're gonna have a fallback. You're gonna have a moment,
Right.
but I
Right.
think it's about how fast you recover from those moments. It becomes, for me, at least from my own healing journey, becomes less and less time in between of having to heal and being able to let go of things, or how long I stay in a certain negative state. Though I still allow myself, like if I'm feeling bad or negative about something, to sit with that emotion and look at it and then be able to move on from it. So I think that's another side of it, of having that compassion for yourself and for another person. that sometimes how they react, it is something they're dealing with on the inside, some kind of frustration, and also giving them that space. I think that would be important. Can we put politicians in timeout? Was my
Really.
was like,
And I really love what you're saying because
yeah,
it's really about personal responsibility. I
yeah,
mean, that's really the bottom line. And that's what I've seen, as a therapist. I've seen it in my own life, whether it's as a client or in a marriage or as a parent. It really comes down to who am I being and could I upgrade the way I'm being? You know, like you said, we're all human. We're going to react. Sometimes we're going to get angry. Sometimes we're going to feel fearful or depressed or have tears. That's fine. We're human. And I think there is part of compassion is having compassion for the multifaceted way that we are emotionally and that we are sensitive and we will have reactions to what's going on around us. But can I learn more and more to be responsible for the way I respond when I have a feeling? Whether it's I'm compassionate toward myself or I'm compassionate toward you, or I stop and listen, or I come back to you and say, I had
mhm,
an edge in my voice and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been that harsh.
yeah,
Um, I know in my own life when people have apologized to me, it's amazing to have someone take responsibility and not just keep blaming or justify.
yeah,
And these are all signs of mental health that we understand we're human, we're fallible, but we take responsibility. And what if we had that as the role model for governance? Yeah, I voted the wrong way. I wish I could take that vote back because I see that my vote hurt people or whatever
hmm,
it was, instead of justifying and denying and, you
yeah.
know, all the symptoms of poor mental health, right?
Is it also like, as the example that you were giving, some sense of ego that we don't want to admit um, that we were wrong or that we voted the wrong way, or in the case I think of a politician that a policy was a bad idea, or something like that. Would that also have to do with the ego side of things? So where I'm getting at is, let's say that person worked on themselves and healed, but they're still having this moment. Is there some kind of other element that they would have to work on, such as like the ego?
Well, I definitely think ego is a part of it if you're talking about like, I have to protect my self identity at all costs and I have to
Hmm.
look good at all costs. And, I feel like it's shameful to say I made a mistake or I could have done better or I wish I had done something different or I'm sorry for the way I talked to you, blah, blah, all of that.
Hmm.
I think ego is a way to look at it. I think another way around that to look at it, what holds that ego structure in place, is that we live in a very blame and shame society
Hmm.
where where we don't necessarily applaud people for admitting their mistakes. We shame them. They're all over the news. Oh my God, that person did this, and then they're
Yeah.
vilified. And instead of like really championing each other to be responsible on that level, to be vulnerable, to admit that they're human, that they make mistakes. And I know the ripple effect of that is when one person in any position of influence, whether it's in a family, in a community, or in a nation, can be vulnerable and
Hmm.
human and admit their failings as well as take responsibility and champion their strengths, it gives permission to everybody to do that. So I feel like we have to get out of this very shame based, blame based, and punishment and judgment based mindset that we live in, because
Hmm.
that is not good mental health. And we know in an individual family, when that's what runs the family, people suffer and they become symptomatic.
Yeah.
It's the same for a country, and that's what's happening all over the
Mm.
world, not just in America.
Yeah, I guess I'm seeing a lot of example flash before my eyes as you're talking about it. That for example, that the I think this happened yesterday or today. I didn't follow the timeline, but that the Dutch cabinet fell, or we call it cabinet. I think it will be the same as the what do you
Mm.
call it? The I can't find the American name for it. The
Okay.
Congress kind of thing. Yeah. Um, so, and you had a politician, Wilders, that made a plan for refugees. And I think it was really involving like shutting the border and that kind of like really extreme. And then it was, and if you don't agree with this, then I'm not gonna be part of this coalition anymore. And that's exactly what happened, which resulted in a split. And I'm trying to analyze that situation with what we're just talking about the mental health of that politician. Um, Not being able to admit that it's what he's been saying is yeah, wrong, or has some kind of other hidden agenda behind it, I guess, because it's something that he's been talking about for years, and then finally he got to a position of like real power in the Congress, and then he's not really been able to implement these things. So it felt like a ultimatum of you must do as I say because I'm not gonna admit that I was wrong, and that's causing yeah, chaos now within the, I don't know, parliament. I can't find the right words, but anyway,
Yeah.
the political
Yeah.
structure
Yeah. It's
there.
the inability to sit down and be committed to working it out. And, we know from our work with individual families and probably for anybody in a relationship today, whether it's a marriage, a partnership, a parenting, a business agreement, a friendship, if I'm committed to working it out with you, that changes the whole conversation. If
Mm,
I'm committed to winning and
right.
dominating you and getting my way, that changes the relationship and the conversation. And,
Mm,
and that's the shift we're really looking for in terms of bringing psychology and good mental health into the conversation, a commitment to work it out peacefully. And this is what we want in our homes. People come to therapy because they're at war with each other. They're at war with themselves or
mm,
their children, or they feel blocked, or they feel dominated, or they feel like they don't have a voice. They come to therapy to try to find a way to have healthy relationships because we really actually all want that, whether
mm,
we admit it or not. And if we don't admit it, then we're living in our defenses, which is what you're giving an example of.
yeah.
The defense is do it my way or the highway. And then nothing gets worked out. People feel left out, or they feel angry, or they feel
Mm,
unheard, and they react. And that's what we have, reactions and explosions all over the world to
yeah.
this inability to commit to working it out with one another. And from my point of view, looking at the world today, I don't know if the human race is going to make it if we don't make that commitment, because we have so many weapons to destroy the planet and ourselves. Um, what are we thinking when we create these weapons of mass
Mm,
destruction? What are
yeah,
we thinking?
it doesn't make sense to me either, Phyllis. But I
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, because if you destroy the planet, that's your home. And
Right.
why would you want to create that situation for yourself? Yeah, I don't understand. And then they build bunkers to escape the situation that they created. And I'm like, that is absolutely insane. That seems indeed like not mentally healthy people
Right.
um, creating destructions and then creating some kind of bubble to live in the hopes to be the only survivor. And I think just the idea of wanting to go, so you create something so it sounds insane to me, and I'm trying to put it in words. Like you create something so destructive, um, and instead of not doing that and just being able to live on our beautiful planet, you opt to create it anyway, and then go down in the ground, like to live there for you don't know how long. That sounds
Right.
insane to me.
Well, I think it is. And I think one of the ways that psychology is so helpful in looking at all of this is that we really do know from experience working, not just me, thousands and thousands of therapists and all the different practitioners that have written books on different aspects of psychology and their experience working with people, that inside the worst perpetrators is an unhealed victim.
Mm,
I did a lot of research when I was writing my book, and one of the things that I came across, and I don't have the number in front of me, but the research shows that well over 50% of incarcerated people in the United States today are unhealed victims of childhood trauma.
wow.
So the answer is to help our families stop the cycle of abuse and neglect on an individual and a community level. The answer is to help people heal, not punish them. Punishment doesn't actually heal. It may
Mm,
stop a person for a certain period of time, but the people who really heal are the people who are helped. And so we really need a restorative justice system, and not a punishment, blame, shame, hate
mm,
oriented system of justice. Because, and if you've heard stories of people who are in prison for terrible crimes, done terrible things and really hurt people, they've been terribly hurt. The vast majority have been terribly hurt themselves, and they're repeating what they know. So
mm.
the goal is to break the cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
And that means on an individual level, and that means on a societal level. If we keep bombing people and traumatizing whole communities and nations and races of people, we're just creating more and more traumatized people who are going to become symptomatic and
Mm.
make us unsafe. It doesn't even make logical sense.
Right. Unless the only logical sense, kind of, that I had as we were talking about this was those people that profit from it. Because you have the people that are unfortunately manufacturing the guns and the buns and the things, the private prisons in the case of the United States, which or they're not going to profit if we start healing the prison population.
Right.
So what I guess the question is, and it's totally fair if you don't have an answer for this, but what do we do for those people? Because at the end, I think if I look at this ideal of having more people healed and less people making themselves and us unsafe, is, well, what about those people that profit from it and do not want to stop this benefit from having people traumatized?
Well, obviously, I don't have a answer. If I did, I would be probably, all over the news or something, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't have a answer. But what I would say is this, that I think we have to start with educating ourselves. The more people that understand the effects of abuse and neglect and violence, that that just getting your way doesn't solve anything if you've hurt other people and left traumatized people in your wake who could turn around and pick up a gun and go shoot up a mall. The more people who understand the power of healing our mental health, the more we're going to stop funding the kinds of things that keep hurting people. And yeah, it seemed like a long way off. I don't know if we're going to be able to do it, but my commitment is to keep trying,
Mm,
to spread, to keep trying to educate people, because I know in my own life, until I understood that I had been hurt, I just believed I was a flawed person.
mm,
And I was not able to find my healthy voice in the world. I was not able to find appropriate power in many situations where I needed to have it. I didn't make good relationship choices.
Mm-hmm.
And that all came out of this unhealed space that I was operating from. And so, if we really understand that on the largest levels, people are making these terribly violent and hateful and discriminatory choices and greedy choices
Yeah.
out of a fundamental background of unhealed mental health, then I think we have a chance to reverse courses. And I'm just going to keep speaking that.
And thank you so much for speaking out about this. I think that yourself, like many of the guests that I've had on the podcast, are doing very important work, and I commend you for it. As I said, as we discussed, it's a big ask. It's a big, we realized the magnitude of what
Right.
needs to be done. But I think if we have more people like yourself, which they're gonna say, "Well, I'm just gonna keep trying," um, if we can potentially get somewhere, even if it's less violent or more healed. I try to not look at it as like we'll reach utopia. At least I don't think in my lifetime. But we can do better, and we should do better. And those of us that have these tools, like in your case, the therapy and healing, the trauma or whatever, other tools there might be, like facilitating these difficult processes, that we should keep trying, and we should find community with each other, and um, motivate each other, because I do get motivated by more people having similar realizations as myself, that are also you know trying, and we're just gonna keep trying regardless of in any. Yeah, you get the negativity of we can't make, but it's too big, you can't make any change. Do you think you can change the world, is one of the questions that I've had.
Mhm.
Like that kind of things, but that you keep going. I really commend that. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work and your story also to some extent, and your vision of what we can achieve. And I wanted to give you a moment to really promote the beautiful book behind you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so much of what I'm saying and much more is in the book that I just wrote, America in Therapy: A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. So I wrote this book really, focused on the United States because that's where I live. But the principles of good mental health and healing our mental health really apply to humanity and to people all over the world. So it's not just applicable, what I'm saying, to the United States. It's really applicable to people everywhere. And the basic focus of the book is what makes up a good, healthy family? What are the dynamics of a dysfunctional and abusive family? What are the after effects that we can expect from a healthy family? What are the after effects and the cycle of abuse that we can expect to happen from dysfunction and abuse happening on the family level, whether it's an individual family, a community, a school, a business, or a nation? And then the rest of the book is really devoted to what are the healing paradigms that we need to shift. We did a little bit about that, but there's a lot more in my book about the different paradigms, our relationship to power, our relationship to equality. What's the relationship between the part and the whole, the individual and the human family, or the individual family, or the community family? Shifting that balance. How do we heal the relationship between competition and cooperation so that we're not competing each other into destruction, you know,
Yeah.
um, making the biggest bombs instead of finding the best cures?
Hmm.
So that's also related to the balance of the part to the whole, the individual to the whole. What's good for the individual and good for the whole. Um, and then I have some really healing principles of how to work with conflict in your own life that are in the book. And then a focus on the last three chapters are called A Case for Safety, A Case for Peace, and The Case for Love, because safety, peace, and love are the deepest healing principles that we need to begin to embody. And I've said this many, many times in many talks, and I say it in my book. Every single person I've ever worked with, and including myself in my own work, the injury to their psyche, bottom line, is an injury to safety, love, and belonging. And so if we're going to heal, we have to provide safety and peaceful belonging and safe belonging for one another.
Yeah.
And that's where psychology offers something that I think a lot of the ideological struggles don't focus on. And that's it in a nutshell. And if you go to my website, www.phyllisleavitt.com, you can see a lot of the blogs that I've written, a lot of podcasts I've been on. You can sign in for my newsletter, which I really try to keep updated with current material. And there's also some free offerings on conflict resolution that you can get by just contacting me on my website. And I'm really all about giving it away. So please, feel free to contact me and check out my book. And thank you so much for giving me the space to say that.
Yeah, of course. And thank you again for joining me and having this lovely conversation. I really enjoyed the conversation and bringing light to this element of healing the inner self and that connection with the outer world. It's something that I touch upon a lot. And I think this was really kind of maybe technical